The mail says Dominion's coming through, and they want us to think there's nothing we can do. Hard to believe, but we found out it's true. They want to build a 42-inch pipeline. We don't want your pipeline. We don't want your pipeline. We'll take the sunshine, the water, and wind. We're gonna put a stop sign on Dominion's pipeline. Go tell your neighbors, go tell your friends.
The first step I would take would be to try to understand the problem in order to solve it. I would learn as much about natural gas pipelines, the regulatory agencies that regulate them, the utility that is promoting the pipeline, the political environment, and I learned about the process, the approval process. And so I'd get a full understanding of what's involved.
When we first got the letter, of course, these companies, what they want to do is to make you feel isolated. They want you to be blown over, and as fast as they can, they will come and get that permission from you for the easement. That we weren't even scared. But the first thing I did was, who else knows about this? And nobody else that I know would ever agree to this. And I haven't heard a thing about this ever. Not from the Board of Supervisors, not from anyone. So first thing I did was call a few neighbors. Nobody knew. Then I got a little nervous, and then I thought, well, I'll ask the extension agent in Livingston. He didn't know. And then I called Ernie Reed, who was a neighbor who I knew was an environmental activist. I said, have you ever heard anything about this oil or a gas pipeline coming through our neighborhood? And he said, oh no, I'm working on stopping these things in California. So if there's anything you hear that's coming through here, you let me know. I said, well, that's what it sounds like. And I brought him over, showed him the letter, and he said, that's ridiculous. And the next day, he got one. So it was funny because they actually want you to think you're the only ones. And when he got one, I thought, well, there's hope because I know Ernie's going to fight against it. So I said, Ernie, what do we do? So, and I guess that is what you always have to do. You have to first determine, of course it's a pipeline, so there's a long line. You're not the only one. Somehow you're on a route. So what we wanted to do is find the route. And Dominion, it does not want you to. I mean, in our case, Dominion, whatever. These people, they do not want you to know the route. They don't want you to think that there's anybody else but you facing this, and that it's a ridiculous thing, and just give up. That's all it is. So anyway, but the more we chatted with neighbors, Martin was at the post office the next day, and he saw another neighbor behind us who was just getting a letter and had the same confused look on his face. And Martin said, we know what that is. So talk to the neighbors. That's the main thing to start out.
In that regard, another thing that I think that's really huge is finding or developing a skill set with mapping. Most counties nowadays have some sort of a GIS program that shows all of the parcels in their county, that shows what the parcel numbers are, that can be a stepping off point for getting contact information for landowners. But I can't tell you how crucial that ability to navigate in that system as routes, as we identified landowners who were on the route as the route changed and we had to identify new landowners. And I know that there were people early on like Ron who had done so much, even going door to door to try and figure out where this pipeline route was, because Dominion was not being particularly transparent about it. But over time, some of that transparency got better. But it still was way far from adequate. And the ability to go to those maps that the county had and look through them to try and identify landowners, to try and see where were the changes, to try and see where were the floodplains, to try and figure that stuff out was huge.
Like Nelson County has parcel records on a GIS. If you get that information, you can then just draw a line across all of those and say, computer select all these parcels that line crosses, and then bam, you'd have it.
Organize. Every neighbor that you can find, every person who is like-minded that you can find, every person who may not care about you losing your property or losing your trees or the environment, but would care about losing their property. Because you can create a coalition of people and hold that coalition together during the fight if you really work towards doing that. But you have to organize first. It's the only way it works. You organize and you find build strategies of what you can do to fight back.
I would say you have to get the word out. You have to let everyone in the area know what's going on, and that is not an easy thing to do. You need to talk to people, you need to talk to your local politicians, your supervisors. We started with creating petitions for the Board of Supervisors saying that this is something we do not want and it will do great damage to the county.
Set up committees based on what people's interests are in the group of people that you're talking to. So maybe some people are interested in the environmental reasons to fight whatever it is they're trying to fight. Maybe there are people who are interested in just the eminent domain portion of that fight. Maybe they are interested in an environmental justice portion of the fight. Maybe this is being set up in the middle of an indigenous community or an African American community. So you can create all of these committees within your group, and they start doing research on how this particular project will affect all of these different areas that you can look at to fight back. And I don't think there's anything wrong with lots of different kinds of groups. Different groups will use different tactics. Some will be not willing to do direct action civil disobedience. Some will be. Some will are willing to go to every public hearing or meeting that there is. Some will just be willing to be in the background. So having lots of different groups fighting the same issue is okay, because they're all going to come at it from a different angle. Sometimes you'll all work together, sometimes you might not. And that's still okay, because the goal is to stop whatever it is. And as long as everyone is working towards that goal, that's really the perfect choice to have.
It was all important. And on the individual level, it was, if you think that this is a big deal and you have the time and energy to get out there and do something about it, go. Definitely do it. I mean, it's real easy as one person to think, I'm only one person, what can I do? But that is not a road you want to go down, because as one person, there's a lot you can do.
You know, I have sort of two sides to this. One is you need a little coordination, but you don't need a lot. And in some ways, the beauty of what happened in Nelson County, and really by extension Augusta and Buckingham and Highland and Bath, but very specifically in Nelson County, from my experience, was that we had a common cause. The common cause we didn't want the pipeline. Some of us didn't want the pipeline for property rights. Some of us didn't want the pipeline for environmental issues. Some of us didn't want the pipeline because we want to exit fossil fuels. Some people, there were a whole bunch of different reasons, and people had different opinions about the impact, the scale of it, all those things. But we all agreed on one thing: we didn't want the pipeline here. And we also discovered pretty quickly that people had different areas of passion and interest and skill sets. And, generally what I feel like happened, and I don't know exactly how, but people coalesced in smaller groups around those areas of interest and passion and expertise, and they just started to fight within their zone of genius.
How to raise money, how to get the public engaged, that was why we had the members, was about having members is important for several reasons. One is to get the public, feeling like more like they have a stake. It's about messaging, anyone can be part of this. It's also to raise money, but yeah, the money that you get from your members isn't really that much, but it's related to raising money, because if you do try to get a grant, you need to show that you have done all this other stuff to raise money. And a major thing is we have members that shows that we have community support. So grantors like to know that you have community support. So you want to be able to say, 500 people are members. People care enough to give us $25. That's an important thing.
We don't want your pipeline, we don't want your pipeline. We'll take the sunshine, the water and wind. We're gonna put a stop sign on Dominion's pipeline. Go tell your neighbors, go tell your friends. Sign on Dominion's pipeline. Go tell your neighbors, go tell your friends.
It was the 8 permits they didn't have, and they didn't have them because of legal challenges. So ultimately, the legal challenges, the legal battles were the single most important factor, right, as far as pushing off the day of decision to the point where Dominion couldn't win anymore.
.501c3 gives you advantages because you can fundraise. Gives you, at least with the group I work with now, which is the Blue Ridge Environmental Defense League, it gives you protection from the overall group, from the corporation. And so there are protections that you gain when you're a 501c3. But there are other groups that don't want to do that. They don't want to raise money. They just want to do work.
Part of wanting to hit the ground running, when you get a fiscal sponsor like we did, you don't have to. You can hit the ground running a lot sooner, and I think that was a big motivation for that. Also for us, FON, we didn't have any clear reason that we needed to get our own 501c3 status. I never heard any compelling reasons to do that. A compelling reason would be that you are not able to find a fiscal sponsor that will work with you as easily as Virginia Organizing did.
It was just absolutely essential that Friends of Nelson and ABRA and all the other groups got together in a big coalition. And everybody, I think Rick is exactly right. The groups all had different approaches that they were taking, but the coalition provided a vehicle for everybody to get on message, to understand what the strategy was, and to focus at critical moments. And I think probably the thing that stands out for me the most is after the Fourth Circuit threw out the Forest Service permit and said the Forest Service didn't have the legal authority to allow the pipeline to cross the Appalachian Trail, Dominion went to Congress and said, we want a law, we want a rider, and they had two sentences. The company had two sentences it was trying to inject into any bill in Washington language, any train leaving the station, any piece of legislation that was going to move, they wanted to stick this rider in. And the ABRA coalition and all the member groups got organized, called their representatives, called their senators, and that didn't happen. Dominion was never successful in getting that legislation passed. And there are dozens of examples like that of the power of a unified coalition. And Lou Freeman, who ran the ABRA coalition, made sure to make that an inclusive tent.
One of the things that happened was there was a huge amount of public opinion and organizations coming together early on in the process. It did not take long for the people of Nelson to rally once everybody started getting the notifications that the pipeline was going to come through their property or their neighbor's property. And I think that one of the important things for the viewers to understand perhaps is that the more different organizations that you can get to come together from the communities that are going to be impacted, all the way from West Virginia to North Carolina, the better off you are, because they all come at it from a different perspective. They all have potentially a different source of income. Money becomes important. One of the first things I remember talking to the Friends of Nelson about was, we're going to need for you to start thinking about how you're going to raise money. You're going to have to become a corporation so that Dominion doesn't ultimately sue you guys as individuals and try to scare you away. But raising money was important because we knew that we were going to have expert witnesses along the way, and those experts were not going to necessarily all be free, and so having different organizations is really, really important. The other comment I'll make about different organizations is that different organizations have a different approach. The Friends of Nelson and ABRA really kind of came together as a community and fought for the community. And then there was another organization, which I can't remember right now, but it was an organization that raised a lot of money. And their approach was to use public relations and to use more of access to their own government officials at a high level, trying to go in and getting those people to slow this thing down and take a harder look and maybe talk to Dominion and maybe even consider alternatives. One of the things that never happened, in my opinion, which I still do not understand, is that there were a couple of organizations that approached Dominion and approached leadership in Dominion and in the state of Virginia and said, we're willing to propose some alternative routes. And Dominion simply was not interested. They never responded. And as a result, they ended up losing the whole pipeline.
Sometimes I've heard the strategy described as 1,000 cuts, right? And I want to, and I think there's some truth to that. The strategy we put together is a little more nuanced. We specifically, you all remember that FERC would issue certificates. When this first came down, the lay of the land was first FERC would approve a project, but you couldn't get into court to challenge it. Right. For months, in some cases years, but the pipeline would get built. And so there were the few examples we could find of opponents beating FERC. The pipeline had already been built and was operational. So that was the issue we needed to take head on. And so the other permits gave us an opportunity to, we set about to stop construction to preserve the status quo in order to get FERC into court.
Because one of the things that we talked about early on, when the first couple of meetings that we ever got together with the Friends of Nelson, and we would talk about the fact that NEPA in and of itself is not going to win this case. You know, it will require them to comply with the law and do a good environmental impact statement and talk about alternatives and do all those things. But the NEPA law does not provide really for a permanent injunction on a proposed action, i.e. the pipeline. The Endangered Species Act does, and if you don't get an NPDES permit, you can't build your project. So those other laws had more teeth, if you will, in terms of really stopping the pipeline from going forward.
The problem that you had with eminent domain, the law was very unfavorable to the landowner. So the law gave Dominion almost complete authority. Essentially, what eminent domain said is when FERC granted the certificate of public necessity such that they authorized the building of the pipeline, with that came the right of eminent domain. So FERC was actually out of it at that point. Now we're pulling them back into it, of course, but FERC was basically out of it. So it was Dominion. You go forth. You put the screws to people. You sue people in federal court. That sort of thing. And the law, therefore, was very favorable to Dominion. Fighting eminent domain was extremely, extremely hard.
Because the FERC process has legal consequences, landowners need to be able to protect their rights. And the way that they can do that, the only way they can do that in the FERC process is to do what's called filing an intervention. An intervention makes you a formal party to the proceeding. So you have a stake in that case as much as the pipeline, which is also a party to the proceeding. So that's the first thing that's very important about intervening. And once you intervene, it entitles you to receive, all of the filings that are made in the case. And the second thing is that when you intervene, it allows you to raise challenges to the project later on. And you may feel like, there could even be circumstances where you're not sure if you're going to be impacted or how greatly you'll be impacted. But if you don't intervene, you kind of waive the ability to do that. So, if the project is approved and you want to challenge anything from a reroute, if it's going like straight through the middle of your field, you say you don't like it, so you don't want it at all, but at least you want to be able to say, look, in a worst case scenario, if you're going to build this darn thing, put it in the road. You don't need it to put it right through my cow pasture. It allows you to say that too. It allows you to also, in a worst case scenario, bring the case to court and bring a challenge in court to the action. But if you don't file that intervention, you're out of luck on all of it. So that's why it's just really important. And it's so easy to file what's called a dockless intervention, which is just like you can fill out a form at the FERC website. You can do it, more extensively, but just anything just to kind of stick your foot into the proceeding.
In hindsight, most people probably aren't going to be as late in the game as I was. I think this, most people have more time than they think, and should definitely use that time to interview in person multiple attorneys and talk to actual people who have been affected in the past on pipelines directly, and not. I would not recommend going off of web reviews or necessarily even just recommended lists by advocacy groups. I think it's much better to get a hold of. If you could find a trusted attorney that practices in another field, like a family attorney or someone like that, you could ask them. But even better, try to get a hold of an advocacy group that could connect you with landowners who had used various attorneys and get a sense. I would also advise people to really take their time and get a sense of they don't want to hire someone that that is just seems like they're trying to sell them something, because it's not, the person you want to hire is not going to be someone that's trying to sell you something that you don't want to buy. You shouldn't feel like you're getting sold a used car. You shouldn't feel like someone's trying to like get your vote, a slick politician. It should be someone, this guy really knows his stuff. He's told me, he's made his pitch in a professional, articulate way, and to ask lots and lots of questions. And if those questions aren't answered clearly and concisely, and even better to try to get those answers in writing, because if someone will only answer your questions orally, and that for me, that's kind of a red flag. If an attorney's not willing to put it in writing, there might be a reason for that. So those are some of the lessons that I learned.
There was a tremendous variety. I would say that, and part of why I started tracking it was to see what might be some of the variables that implicated that. And the first thing that I would say is that people who signed early got crap. Very few that signed early got the kind of settlements that people later did.
I say it is absolutely important, if you're going to hire a lawyer, we have one that's knowledgeable about this process, environmental stuff, and so forth, not the local lawyers, because it wasn't only Ralph Turpin that said go forward, it was somebody else as well, a lawyer. So I say, they couldn't really help. They didn't know enough about it, they didn't have enough personal interest in it, because speaking of Ralph, he wasn't going to be personally affected. It's going to be way out there, take your money and run. But, now that I know more about all of it, having somebody like you were speaking of, Cornelius, that's important to have somebody with some knowledge, real knowledge about how these things work.
Well, a letter in the mail says Dominion's coming through, and they want us to think there's nothing we can do. Hard to believe, but we found out it's true. They want to build a 42-inch pipeline. We don't want your pipeline. Go tell your neighbors, go tell your friends.
The most crucial part of any permit for a new facility is whether it's necessary and provides a benefit to the general public. And FERC issues a certificate that says that. It's a certificate of public convenience and necessity. The only difficulty is they don't really independently evaluate either one of those things.
So what did Dominion originally claim about the need for the HCP, and did they have anything supporting evidence for that claim other than that they were going to make a whole load of money off of this?
Well, they never claimed that publicly, but that was certainly the purpose of the project. They claimed that 80% of its capacity would be needed for new power plants that were intended to be built in Virginia and North Carolina up until 2030. They never provided any evidence that that would in fact occur. And it didn't occur. None of those power plants that were proposed to state regulators to be built. And they haven't been built and most likely won't be built. Now, FERC never checked whether that was true or not. They just took the utility's word for that.
Gosh, there's so many ways to inspire others in this fight. Art is one of the greatest because it's joyful too. It's a fun, communicating through art, either music or sculpture or any kind of art generally brings a little bit of joy. And the thing that we all need when you're running this marathon of a race with these guys is joy. Interject it whenever you can. And I think too, when you're doing something that's a little bit more joyful and colorful, it attracts some media attention that is, it's a tough issue, but it's still a happier coverage, I guess you could call it. But so I think definitely through art, letters to the editor. You cannot underestimate those. you're getting your opinion out there. And for people in the community to be letting other people in the community know what they know in a way in which is, if they're known, that creates trust in your community. They can ask questions. Farmers market. Wow, we did the farmers market for years, and that was a great way to talk to visitors and locals alike, keeping them up to date on the latest petition, the latest happening in government. There was always something. There was always something we could bring up and educate the public about, and actually having them sign something kind of forced them for a few minutes to read what it was, and hopefully that in turn would keep it fresh in their minds.
Every week, Saturday morning, from 8 till 12, we would have a tent, a canopy, with T-shirts for which we could receive donations. They were not for sale.
Right, no.
And every week, when I was doing it, I would write up something that people could sign. There was information there about the pipeline. But largely, it was a kind of a one-on-one thing. You do enough of an attraction to get people over, and they get them in conversation. And other people come over, and so on. You get them to sign this petition that goes to, somebody in the legislature, or a letter to the governor, or whatever. Just to keep the pot boiling, sort of, and to get the feedback from the people as to what was on their minds. So, I would write these letters, and every week I would send off a packet of 30 to 50, depending on how hot the issue was. And made it simple for them. They just had to sign their name and give their zip code or something, whatever's minimally needed to make it legit.
Do things that are unexpected. You can't play the game that the big guy has set out. If you play that game, you're going to lose because, they control everything and they have so much more power and resources. So what you have to do when you're the little guy is not follow the program. Denying the survey served as a rallying cry. It pulled people together. That was one thing it did. It gave us media attention and attention in general. The second thing it did. It caused wonderful delays that are very useful in general. Really long delays, so that was really great. It was the only means available for a landowner to really be clear that they opposed the project on their property.
That probably public awareness was going to be key. And so I started Free Nelson at about the same time that Friends of Nelson was starting up. Charlie Weinberg was at that point in time was doing the Facebook work for Friends of Nelson. And so we would talk every night to see, well, what are you posting so I don't post what you post? And we were taking actually a different stance eventually, one going more in the litigation realm, and we were going more in the grassroots, keep the drum beat visible and audible. So then I asked Sharon Ponton and Marilyn Shiflett to join me on Free Nelson so that we could all post. Of course, it didn't show who was posting; it just posted as Free Nelson, so that we could keep that drumbeat moving. And of course, Elena Amadon was also working in a separate group, and so the three groups seemed to be doing different things, but all contributing to the process of keeping things in the public eye. We began to do interviews of property owners and putting that on Facebook. John Ed was probably the most central of the folks that we interviewed. He was so passionate about his opposition to the pipeline and not coming through his property, and his joy in Nelson County being kept pipeline free and how beautiful the land was. And so I began to realize there was a stewardship link for churches that care of the environment. is a call for most faiths. And in my own tradition, the Episcopal tradition, it's the stewardship of the earth is really part of what we're pledged to uphold. So regardless of political party, it seemed like I could appeal to getting some support from my faith tradition and perhaps other churches in the area.
As a farmer, he was concerned about contamination of the water, the streams for beef cows, both from sediment, the erosion from the pipeline construction, and also the chemicals that they would have to use to keep weeds down, the herbicides and all of that. He was concerned about how the well water would be contaminated because, of course, most of Nelson County is well water. He was concerned about, fear of explosion. They had an explosion in Appomattox, and which was close by near Nelson. And of course, they've had other explosions and leaks.
Well, he'd wear his bib overalls because that's what he always wore, and show up, and his ball cap, and he would sit and listen. And they told him he was their poster child sometimes. But it meant a lot to him. It meant a lot to him to have people, supporting him. And we noticed that he started to slip some. He couldn't sleep. He worried constantly. All day long. That's all he thought about was the pipeline. And so it really helped him to be with other people that he knew were fighting. Maybe they didn't have all the generations, of family on a piece of property, but their property meant just as much to them, too.
The people, of course, were very upset. They didn't have a really in-depth, understanding of what that meant. But I think Friends of Nelson started out it was great with all of the information and talking points. And Reverend Rose really took the lead, because it went through a huge amount of his family property. And then we just got together with other people in the community and explained, what was happening, and also what they could expect, that they would be getting communication from ACP, from Dominion, about that they were on the route, and that they would get letters requesting surveys. And so we had prepared people, and that was really very important to get early on, to get people to understand what was going to happen. But it became very press-worthy. The original article I found, the first article on Reverend Rose, was from that Seaville weekly paper. It was from October of 2014. And then I am trying to think how I got connected with Michael Martz at the Richmond Times.
He became interested in the story and then kept coming back and really was a huge advocate. Didn't write advocacy journalism, but just got the facts out, which were a kind of, they advocated for us themselves, the facts.
I think earlier on, we were more focused on the denying of survey in the Wingina area, and people, and really documenting the impact personally on people and on their land, and particularly a lot of these families that have held onto their land for generations. So at first it was I think more of a press and kind of public education, because that was one of I don't know if that was the original or one of the original routes. But then later on, as we got more sophisticated, and then our land ended up on one of the alternative routes, that's when we went into this major effort and worked a lot with Ron and did the Dear Neighbor letters, identified everybody on the route and wrote letters, went door to door, identified which people were just landowners but didn't live in the area, and that it was very comprehensive in terms of, you're going to get this information, here's what to do. we recommend that you get an attorney and the options there. So, I mean, I think we all, as you said, we all learned through the process and got,
what is this process?
a lot more, just a lot more involved and kind of understood what the kind of education that people needed.
Bring it to the attention of the public, then it does go on record somehow, a little bit bolder than it was before. And so when it is accumulating, then you got this resistance that's going on. And these people, when the people who are in those decisions, when they see that there are people caring in numbers and are going to be negatively affected in numbers, then the ones who are human can make the difference in a vote. And it only takes one vote sometimes.
The very first thing I think you ought to do is talk to your friends and your neighbors. Start some communication lines, because two heads are better than one. And if you are a part of a community, there's going to be a lot of ideas thrown out how to fight the pipeline. Some of them are going to be pie in the sky, and you're just going to toss those out the window. They might feel good to say them, but they're not going to work. But other people are going to have good, solid suggestions that the community as a whole can and should follow. And there's going to be a lot of different ideas thrown out, and you need to be open-minded to all of the ideas that come from your friends and your community. So communication is first and foremost if you receive notice that a pipeline is coming to your neighborhood.
And I believe during the pipeline fight, the Atlantic Coast pipeline fight, that it was the grassroots work, whether it was going to a planning commission meeting to try to stop a work yard from going in somewhere, whether it was going to Richmond to a public hearing, or to a local board of supervisors to a public hearing, or having something outside somewhere, some protest. It was that grassroots work through all those long years, and they were long, tough years. But it was that work that set up the legal fight, that made the legal fight be what it was. And in the end, Dominion, we always told ourselves we had to outlast Dominion by one day. And so July 5th of 2020, when I was sitting in my car waiting for Johnny and saw that come across my scroll, and that they had decided they weren't going to build the Atlantic Coast pipeline, well, we had all outlasted them that one day.
Well, it never crossed our minds that we wouldn't fight. No matter what happened, we knew we were right. For 6 years we fought, we marched and wrote letters, knowing if we won, we would make the world better. We don't want your pipeline, we don't want your pipeline. We'll take the sunshine, the water and wind. We put a back the south side on Dominion's pipeline. Go tell your neighbors, go tell your friends. We're gonna put a stop sign on Dominion's pipeline. Go tell your neighbors, go tell your friends.
But trying to get information about the pipeline was like pulling teeth. I remember that big meeting that Dominion had. We were so hopeful that then everybody, who had come to some of the other meetings and wasn't able to really ask questions of Dominion would now have an opportunity. We could all go and people would ask questions. So when you went in, if you wanted to find out about landslides or something, you went to this table so that nobody got the same information. I remember going over to the woman who did the initial layout. I said, why did you select this route? She said, well, we knew we were going to start here and be here, so we just drew a line like that. I mean, she admitted it. I mean, that was, no flyovers, no anything. It was just like this. Now, I think somebody had probably realized that going through Albemarle County would be a disaster, and Nelson County, this little podunk country rural place with 12,000 people, would probably not mind too much. And I think that's why they came straight down. And of course, they changed the route later on. But I went to many meetings trying to get information. I remember I was on the Chamber of Commerce because I was trying to bring a little bit of a different perspective to the chamber, which was just, anyway. The Dominion guy came. A Dominion guy had been invited to come and talk to the chamber about all the economic benefits that this would bring, the pipeline would bring to businesses. And I asked him, I said, okay, so you're saying there are going to be jobs. How many permanent jobs will Nelson County have after this pipeline is built? And he looked at me and he said, none. Well, that's not the kind of information they were putting out, of course, And we all knew that there would be a lot of jobs for construction, but nothing for people afterwards. I mean, we were kind of shocked about that. So just getting information was just, I've never seen an organization be so, I don't know if devious is the right word, but dismissive, probably, of questions and working around them and not answering them. Boards of supervisors have an enormous amount on their plates. And there is no way that any individual supervisor could possibly get the information that he or she needed to really understand some of the issues related to the pipeline. And I think it was Nancy who suggested that we form an inter-county organization that could provide information, that we would be there to educate all the different boards of supervisors. And I was asked to find out if this was legal, because I was on the Virginia, Board of Supervisors state organization. So I called up their attorney, and they said we had no legal right to form such an official committee. But I always thought it would have been so helpful for someone to work on a given individual and educate us, and not just in Nelson County, but in all the different counties, because it was just too much to know.
There was the legal fight, which was unique to Nelson County, which was the Clean Water Act doesn't allow you to build a pipeline through designated wetlands, and Dominion had to request a variance, and our Board of Zoning Authority actually denied variances to go through the wetlands in Nelson County. That was the result of some lawsuits, and there were still aspects of that case that were still pending when the project was canceled.
We'd been working on the floodplain ordinance for a couple of years, and like so many different things, nothing was going on, nothing was happening. And then we had this dynamic young zoning administrator, Tim Padalino. And Vicki Wheaton contacted me, and we started just chatting about the floodplain ordinance and how we needed to get it done. And Tim was like, yeah, we should get this thing done, get it off the books. And it had come to the Board of Supervisors several times and sent back because of different things. And the last time it was ready to go, Vicki and I worked this out, and Vicki spent a great deal of time contacting the DCR people to get all that. It's complicated, but there are all these different things that you can put into a floodplain ordinance that gives you a better deal for your citizens that I'm not even going to go into. But there were a few things in there that I thought, well, let's just do this. One of them was not allowing anything like natural gas to cross over a stream, to go through a stream. The other was not putting anything from someplace else as fill into a stream, because we'd heard about coal ash and all sorts of horrible stuff going into streams as fill for some pipelines and whatever. And Tim said, well, I'll put it in there, but it's never going to fly. Never happening. Not going to happen. I said, just put it in there. He put it in there. And because that ordinance had come through the supervisors so many times and nobody sort of noticed, that we put in these restrictions that were very important, it passed. Later on, Tommy Harvey says, I never passed that. No, I didn't vote that. I said, well, you signed it, whatever. And I think that had a big impact, that we really put these things in that a variance is requested for, and they were going to have to do a variance for every crossing. And that wasn't going to happen. And then the lawsuit started related to that.
The only way something gets a fresh look is to present the information in a fresh way, new information, and then make sure it gets into the right hands. Dominion never even applied for many of those variances. So it was clear that they had hit a roadblock.
Yeah, we just had the minimum requirements.
Right.
Every floodplain ordinance that's out there has to meet the minimum requirements. What I was asking, and what FEMA is really pushing for, and the reward is being part of this community rating system is all, but counties have to voluntarily adopt the higher standards. They can't, the minimum is all they can require, but they highly recommend. And they say also that if you enact higher standards, they take precedence over the minimum standards. And I also would encourage, based on this, that counties right now start looking at their floodplain ordinances and start adopting some of these higher standards just for global warming alone. And it's interesting that there's so few people that have like flood insurance, even in Nelson County. It's like amazing how few have it. And one of the things when you do adopt higher standards, and I hope that Nelson County is going to pursue this further, is that you can be part of this community rating system. And it actually decreases premiums because counties have made their floodplains more safer.
Getting to the local government, I think we were pretty slow, I thought. And maybe because we did get to them, but you know, that small body of people that you initially get, even if it's 2 or 3 people, go to your local government and tell them you don't like it, you don't want it.
I think it's important to understand that the local government will be being courted by Dominion also.
Yeah.
And so the local government is going to feel like, oh, we're going to get all these jobs. We're going to look great.
Right.
So you need to do the research to find out what the actual story is, so you can educate the local government and then then educate the public and then whatever. But they're being courted too, and they're being told you're gonna look like a big job giver around here. But it ain't so.
It ain't so.
Well, a letter in the mail says Dominion's coming through, and they want us to think there's nothing we can do. Hard to believe, but we found out it's true. They want to build a 42-inch pipeline. We don't want your pipeline. We don't want your pipeline. We'll take the sunshine, the water, and wind. Gonna put a stop sign on Dominion's pipeline. Go tell your neighbors. Go tell your friends.
The ACP drew up its plan and then amended its plan, and both plans had it come in directly through us, through historic resources, through registered landmarks, through floodplains, through scenic historic districts. So it was making a tremendous impact, and I'm here to tell you that there were a lot of focus on defending against the pipeline, but I think the Rockfish Valley Foundation has never wanted to claim the major impact it had on it, but I'm here to tell you that we did. It all starts with who has a seat at the table. FERC builds the table. They are required by federal law to bring in the State Department of Historic Resources to complete a task. And the task is to evaluate if any resources are going to be affected. And that's where you come back to knowing what your resources are and having them get listed so that you've got your weapon, so to speak, in your arsenal. FERC then says, you've got Dominion, for example, you've got to check some boxes before you can begin your project. One of them that you must check is the 106 process. In the state is the one, Roger Kirchen at Virginia, Roger convened some parties. Well, who are those parties going to be? And that's where it's really difficult. The feds don't like naming consultants to a project. They don't like having people sit around a table. They want it all done through e-library, uploads of documents. They don't want people communicating and making it clear where it stands. You always have a representative of your local government. Nelson Board of Supervisors, Ernie Reed. Before him, this took a number of years, Connie Brennan. We had leadership at that level. The Historical Society was given a seat at the table, not a vote. The Rockfish Valley Foundation was given a seat at the table. Again, not a vote. No documents required our signature. The deal had to be struck between the state, FERC, and the developer, Dominion. We were fortunate in that we had done our historic district, and archaeology sites have a different presence than a historic farm or historic structures. Archaeology is a little different. It's identified, but it's not one of the pushes for the district. It's archaeology, it's not historic properties. And we did have all of that. We had many registered properties, some that the easement would go right through, and some that was in a viewshed. But the archaeology site itself was cut through in two places on the plans. And then Dominion, it was such a big project. Dominion made mistakes that they weren't even aware of until landowners pointed them out to them. And that's going to happen in any project that's a couple hundred or 2,000 miles, whatever the length of the thing is going to be. It's just too big for everybody to have every tree in dissection. And we learned that somebody at Dominion said, you've got to find another route because the law says find another route. The guy who drew the route for Dominion, I got to know him, he's a very nice man, did an excellent job for what he was told to do. But he drew it through a conservation easement. He didn't even know that a place like the Virginia Outdoors Foundation had conservation easements that he was going through. He did not even know that he was going through a historic farm, registered not for the house and the outbuildings, but for the farm. 250 years of agriculture. This exists all over the state of Virginia. Look and understand as best you can your options for putting on easements through people like the Virginia Outdoors Foundation or other holders of easements. Look at registering a historic place that's not going to say your door has to be brown and not green. They don't control you that way. It's not a penalty, it's a protection.
down in our area, some of the Friends of Nelson, they came down there, we went through the areas down there, we found out some cemeteries that on the properties down there that was unidentified. We don't know who the graves were or anything, because we wanted to find out in their community about the African American cemeteries, because we didn't want them to disturb them. Some other people saying, well, you're not going to win because the corporations have too much money, that you can't beat these big corporations. And a lot of people were fearful of that you're going to lose. But I think when people stand together and fight together, then, you have to stick together and fight together in order to get something done. And also on 56, they had the St. Eben Baptist Church, which is the oldest black church in Nelson County. They wanted to come right by that church also. And they offered this church some money, but they wouldn't take it because of the historical of the church. And they eventually moved it from over there.
I do think that when I was looking at some of the articles from the early times, and there was a big interest in the historical impact on when John and the Warminster Historic and the African American and the Native American. That was something that really got some traction in the media stories. So, and the company, because they did change the route, but then of course they just put it on the other side of 56 to other African American families, but they did pay attention.
Warminster was settled by my ancestors in the 1700s, and had been, but it wasn't. It was around the same time that the Historical Society became the sponsor of, and I became the applicant for, the Warminster Rural Historic District, which that was one of the reasons that I met you guys too, because we were all kind of moving in this, doing whatever we could to, figure this out. And I think it is important to be mindful of the history of our ancestors, our Native American ancestors, our Black ancestors, all of whom are kind of still, hanging around there, in the area. And it's important to understand the power of that. But it's not incumbent on somebody who wants to put a pipeline through to do the research for you. You have to do the research and get it to them.
Well, a letter in the mail says Dominion's coming through, and they want us to think there's nothing we can do. Hard to believe, but we found out it's true. They want to build a 42-inch pipeline. We don't want you pipeline.